Hello everyone, welcome to the 146th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video I'll be commenting on an interview between Kurt Jaimangal on the Theories of Everything channel and Daniel Schmachtenberger. A very interesting conversation on AI, extinction, metacrisis. So I have some notes here, I'll just go through them, and today I'm speaking in front of the piano because there'll be a few things I'd like to illustrate on the piano. So the first thing that they discuss is this war between Russia and Ukraine, existential threat of humanity basically destroying itself, and that if they don't know what World War III would look like, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. There's a point to that, but I'd just like to rattle a few cages here, because there's so much focus on destruction, failure to do X or Y, and a lot of pressure that we're putting on ourselves as humanity to not fail, because otherwise we'll all die and it'll be terrible and whatever. And here I'm just going to provide a very provocative point of view, purposefully so, because I think that this kind of way of thinking is also kind of limiting in what we're supposed to do for the future. So I think I did already talk about this in a previous video, but it's this idea of what if we cannot fail? And that's something that humans have very high difficulty grasping or sort of processing. What if we cannot fail? That is, imagine if, regardless of what we do, regardless of whether we destroy ourselves or not, from a certain vantage point, we cannot fail. And that is very difficult for us to accept, because the concept of failure, or the fact that we can fail, is again an attempt to narrow down our choices in order to not make a choice, not make a conscious choice, by trying to restricting our choices so much that there's only one possible choice or one possible option that we can choose because it's the right one, the correct one. It's this idea of correctness, again, finding an absolute truth. And as I've said repeatedly, whenever you're seeking for an absolute truth, what you're ultimately trying to do is to getting rid of free will and choice, because you're just too scared of it, or it's too much of a sort of superpower kind of, you're like, because I'm not deserving of this kind of power of actually choosing or consciously choosing, or having a preference and actually going after that preference. I'm trying to sort of paint a picture of the world where there is right and wrong and all these other things, so that my options are actually narrowed to the point where there's only one good option, and that's one we could follow. And besides, the advantage is, once I've proven that, then I can also force other people to follow me down that path, because it's the right and the only correct one, the only possible one. So it's quite a violent also type of way of thinking, because it's a way of narrowing down choices for everyone else as well, saying that your own path is the correct one. So I've said it already in previous videos, but when I had my spiritual awakening, I had this kind of intuition when I was half crazy and thought that I was a black hole that was conscious of myself, and just gave myself the appearance of being human, but I was actually a singularity, blah blah blah. That ultimately, us being here on Earth, it's as if consciousnesses that were residing in the center of the black hole of the galaxy of the Milky Way, or in the center of a few solar systems in other parts of the galaxy, said, you know what, we'd like to have life in our solar system, but we wouldn't want it to derail in quite crazy kind of scenarios, or, going all cancer-like and, having interstellar wars like Star Wars or whatever. So what we're going to do is project our consciousnesses into this one planet that is kind of, very special, and we're going to make sure that all the rules are tweaked and everything so that life can experience itself there. It's like a sandbox. And from that experiment, we get all the wisdom necessary to make sure that when we initially start life on our planets, it's not going to derail into, this giant superorganism that ends up colonizing the entire galaxy and eating everything in its path, in order to maximize its or optimize its well-being or whatever in a cancer manner. And so that's basically what we're here for, apparently. It's a kind of a test run for life. And the reason why I'm saying we cannot fail is that you cannot fail by of feeling everything that you're experimenting right now. Like, that is what humans do all the time. Like, every time an experience happens, something happens, whether there's a war or something, regardless of what you think about it in your mental little, world, there's something that you feel about it. And what you feel about it usually isn't that much influence with your mental state. Your mental state comes afterwards, where you kind of rationalize what you felt in the first place, because feeling is instantaneous. You instantly feel that something is wrong or right, and then, you put a mental overlay of it. Oh yeah, and this is the reason why, blah, 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 blah. But that's just secondary. Like, when somebody slaps you, you don't first say, somebody slapped me. Why do I feel that? You're just saying, you just feel pissed off, or you feel bad, or you feel that this is not right. This is your violation of your bodily integrity. So you feel it. And just by feeling it, you're already sending a message. You're already sort of informing the field of, collective intelligence or something, and making it grow in its wisdom. And then what you rationalize about it, that's just you telling yourself stories. And it's not necessarily all that important. So the feeling is really primordial. I'll come back to why it's so important in the future. So now the reason why I'm at the piano is because imagine if these consciousnesses sort of projected themselves into this earth plane and, incarnated into humans, and then had this test run of, okay, how can we make sure that life doesn't degenerate into this kind of cancer where it colonizes the entire galaxy and whatever. But especially, how can we ensure that life bridges two dimensions, which is, I've already presented this kind of structure where the star is like the bridge between physics and chemistry, because within a star, all other chemical elements or atoms are forged, because initially there are only a few atoms, and then, all the other atoms are formed. And then from that, when a star explodes, then you can form planets, which is the world of chemistry, which is not the world of the star is not the world of chemistry, it's the bridge between those two worlds. And then the planet is the world of chemistry. And then in the world of chemistry, then you have life, which is the bridge between the world of chemistry and biology, because, within a cell, you could say, well, it's really, really complex chemical reactions. Obviously, it's much more than that. But still, it's like the bridge between two dimensions. And then the human is the bridge between a material world, like the world of biology, basically, everything that's up to us, and then an immaterial world, which is the world of thought, abstraction, ideas, things that are immaterial. Like, if you want to point to where democracy is, it's an idea that took material form through humans. It doesn't exist if humans are not here. Democracy is just not in this dimension. And so you need to create these bridges. It's like, imagine, things of being organized into octaves, like C. Yeah, and you need to make sure that the story of the universe basically evolves to move from one dimension to the other. Like, that there is no, it doesn't lead to a dead end and you stop like in the middle. Like you start from here, like let's say this is the living cell, and then you go all the way to like pluricellular organisms, dinosaurs, and then evolutionary cul-de-sac, because biology just does more and more bigger and bigger monsters, some with bigger and bigger shells to protect themselves from predators, and predators that are ever more deadly and lethal with bigger and bigger teeth. And then it's like go back down to break down into basic biology and cells, and doesn't bridge that gap between two dimensions, two octaves of reality, which is the world of biology, for instance, and ideas and thoughts. And also form these whole or hold-on structures. Like a star, you can clearly identify a star as a very key kind of structure in the universe, just as a planet is also a key structure, just as a living cell is a key structure, just as, you could say that a human is also a sort of a key structure between, in the universe. And there's sort of these key building blocks from which, if you have them, just like these octaves, you can rebuild everything virtually through harmonics, basically, because all of them sort of include the harmonics of all the other notes within them. But they're not necessarily materialized, and they're not necessarily part of a nice little story that you play out on your piano to go from one scale to the other. And so that's here, Earth, it's almost like a test run for life on other planets in another kind of a higher kind of dimension. And then it's about how that wisdom kind of, or that knowledge that is accumulated on this planet reaches all those other solar systems where the consciousnesses decided that they think that it'd be interesting to introduce life into one or another planet in their solar system. And so this is all comes down to this dimensional kind of game where either you can introduce new life on those solar systems by humans forming a collective global organism and interacting in harmony, and just like a baby sort of, comes out of the womb and then crawls across the world, humans kind of come out of the womb of this planet and then crawl across the galaxy, and but don't do it in a way that a cancer would do. Do it in a way that is very strategic and well thought of, because we have clear boundaries, like a baby has a skin, and it doesn't just just explode and inseminate the whole world and contaminate it with its own cells. It's very strategic in where it plants things and does things. And so one way of achieving that goal is humans forming this collective, and then finding technologies to sort of go from this planet to other planets, and then, seed them with life in various forms, right? That's one way of going about it. But then another way is we kill ourselves. And then our consciousnesses, which are not tied to our bodies, whatever lessons we've learned and informed into the field, then go directly to the heart of the black hole that resides at the center of the sun of those solar systems. And then life is kind of guided by this kind of beam or information that is beamed from a higher dimension into lower dimensional planes, and steers, molecules and stuff to create life in the same way that biologists, think that life emerged here, with there's life that emerged in these pockets of the ocean where the temperature was just right to get this kind of bubbly, state of amino acids, proteins, and whatever, the perfect cocktail and conditions for life to emerge. And ultimately, the result is absolutely the same. It's just a matter of seeding or having these experiences of seeding life on these planets through a lower octave or through a higher one. So instead of, going on a lower scale, evolving from a lower scale and then going to the point where you seed life at some point on these planets as a physical body, as a physical human, going physically there, through a wormhole or something, and then from your spaceship, you inseminate it with life, or going from a higher octave down and saying almost like compressing information that is somewhere in a higher dimension into lower dimensional wisdom that guides these molecules, proteins, amino acids to create the first kind of DNA or whatever. The result is exactly the same. And so when I'm saying we can't fail, we literally can't fail, but we are very uneasy with this, because where does that leave us? If we cannot fail, then we can finally actually exert a choice, a real choice, based on preference, and not on some kind of non-choice, which is you eliminate every other choices and saying this is the only choice, rational choice we can make because it's the right one. And it's kind of like picking the flavor of an ice cream. Like imagine if you had to actually rationally eliminate all the other flavors and identify the right one, instead of just saying, you know what, I actually prefer this taste, and I'm going to pick that one. That's where it leaves us. And that's very, very uncomfortable for many humans. We prefer that all of the other options are eliminated so we don't need to think about them. And not go through preference, but rather tie our hands and saying, this is the only way we can move forward and let's do it. And the point is, even though from a higher kind of perspective, it doesn't matter, we cannot fail, we're still the ones that will have to experience, subjectively speaking, as humans with a biological body and pain and all that stuff, the scenarios that we pick. So when you pick an ice cream, you're the one that's going to have to eat it. So you're going to have to be okay with the flavor that you've picked. And so that's the only thing. And so when, you're faced with, okay, maybe we will destroy ourselves in a nuclear war. Maybe AI will enslave us all and get rid of us. Even though at a higher level, it won't matter because the lessons will be learned regardless and the result will be the same from, our soul's perspective, whatever you want to call it. We're still the ones that have to actually experience it. And since, we'd prefer, very important word, an experience which is pleasant, that is where we all get together and live in harmony and all that stuff, rather than this kind of doomsday scenario where we have to be in fear and suffer and die and all that stuff and be panicked and all that stuff, then let's pick the right flavor ice cream and go for that choice. And I think it actually lifts a lot of responsibility from your shoulders, from a person's shoulders, because you're not like, I'm carrying the whole weight of the universe on my shoulders because the whole universe or the planet and everything rests in the balance and all these species and oh my God, what is going to happen? I mean, nothing ultimately gets destroyed. You can't destroy anything. This information will be there forever. And, it's like a person in a video game thinking that because he failed at the video game that the saved or the lessons learned that you've experienced in your video game somehow disappear. Well, no, the person playing actually has all the experiences. You, as an avatar, you can disappear, but, the information is not lost. So this idea that because we fail, somehow the universe is less smart because we disappeared, that's all just an ego trip. But that's accepting the greatest gift that was given to us is to actually have a preference and have a choice, a real choice of what we can pick and experiencing the choice that we've made based on our preference. And we want to get rid of it so bad. It's like, no, I don't want to choose. Choose for me. And the way you're going to choose for me is you're going to give me a sort of paradigm that restricts all the possibilities, narrows them down to just this one option that is a non-option because I have to pick it because that's survival is at stake. And then that's the only way to go. God, I mean, the universe has gifted us with this unique thing of having a preference, of actually having an opinion of what we should choose, and we don't want it. We don't want it. It's crazy. I mean, imagine a consciousness that is infinite, eternal, immortal. It doesn't have any preference because it doesn't care. It doesn't get it. It can think something, experience it, and then it can think something else and experience it. It's like switching video games. And you're like, oh, in this one, it's a first-person shooter and I'm killing everybody. Oh, in this one, I'm playing Care Bears. But to me, I'm not affected because I'm just a consciousness having experiences, but I'll have unlimited experiences and I can't die. So if you can't die, you can't have preferences. You can't rationally sort of order choices and saying, this is the one that I prefer versus this one, because you'll end up tasting every single ice cream flavor regardless because doesn't matter. But because we're mortal, and that's really something fascinating to a universal consciousness. And the reason why we are the way we are is that it is fascinated with the fact that we have a preference, that we actually have an opinion about what's good or what isn't, or that we prefer a certain flavor of ice cream over another. And that is because we're limited, we're mortal, and all of that stuff. So it's like a universal consciousness tries to limit itself and trick itself into being something limited in order to experience the magical thing of actually having an opinion about what to want, what to prefer. And then once it's there, it says, oh, I don't want to choose. I don't want to prefer anything. Tell me what to do. Please give me like this manual and like with this one right option. And I don't want to take responsibility. I mean, come on, So that's the one thing I want to say regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. Then it's also there's this kind of, we want it both ways where we're scared. I mean, in this video, there's this whole idea about tech, and how tech is sort of driving this metacrisis and how tech is driving us into an evolutionary cul-de-sac and all that stuff. And to a certain degree, I agree that for the moment, the way we use tech is driving us towards our own extinction and the extinction of the biosphere. But what I want to underline is the irony in trying to have it both ways. And what I mean by that is we want to keep our materialist and scientific approach to, viewing reality, but at the same time, we want tech to not destroy reality, when tech is actually the manifestation or the materialization of science and empirical thinking. Because science and empirical thinking, at the basis, at the really, really, really core of its beliefs, views things in a mechanistic kind of way, with cause and effect and with things being material. And so you have then the outpicturing of that kind of way of viewing in the world as an ontological or epistemological. I don't know how to use these words, but I like to use them because they make me sound smart. But they have these underlying assumptions that inevitably get manifested as technology, which rests on the principle of cause and effect, of materiality, and of a mechanistic way of viewing reality. And humans are treated in the same way. Now, if you look at what we've experienced with the coronavirus, that is one way that the universe is gently trying to show us that our way of viewing the world as purely with empirical science and that kind of methodology leads us into being treated like machines and cogs, where you have a problem and then we're all treated like cars that have to go every 6 months to get their oil checked and their brakes fixed, and if they don't do that, they can't drive on the road. And that's the whole scenario with like forced mandatory jabbing and stuff. Is we're being treated like mechanical robots that should all, have their oil checked and with the same kind of oil brand and the same kind of methodology. Well, there are several brands of jab, substance, but you get the picture. It's like the same methodology applied to every single human that is treated like a car, like a machine. And so we want to stick to this materialist, view of the world and empiricism, because it is reassuring in a kind of way. It gives us the illusion of control over a mysterious and super complex reality. And at the same time, we don't want the end result, which is the outpicturing of that kind of view of the world, like technology, to not destroy us. And you're like, that's absurd. Like, imagine if monotheism, we were still under monotheism, and we believed in it so much that we started to having actually materialized demons and angels. And then we went to these demons and angels and said, okay, please, to the demons, please be nice. Please don't destroy us. And the demons are like, are you kidding, you idiots? I mean, you created us based on this monotheistic view of the world with all its assumptions, with everything that's said in the Bible about demons. And then you want the demons to behave other than what created them in the first place. And it's this whole idea that in order to really make sure that technology serves us well, and that it doesn't destroy us, it's this idea of completely changing our paradigm and the way we view reality. And it's the same with what helped us transition from monotheism to materialist science and interact with technologies like gunpowder or the combustion engine in a way where we didn't self-destruct each other. Because one has to remember that, for instance, if you view these technologies from the perspective of a monotheist worldview, then gunpowder was described as the devil's distillate. So this kind of powder that exploded, it was kind of magical and weird and mystic, and it was called the devil's distillate because it had such destructive power that it came from a demon. Imagine if a steam engine in the beginning was viewed as a machine coming from hell because of this hellish fire that you had to entertain and cultivate in the furnace, or that it was an angelic kind of machine because it was powered by steam, which is like condensed spiritual energy of the angels. And I don't think we would have been able to handle the Industrial Revolution and all the technologies that emerged from after that, sticking with a monotheistic view of the world. And similarly, what is happening right now with AI, with deep fakes, with all of these crazy technologies that are emerging everywhere, it's that unless we shift beyond our materialist and empirical kind of paradigm or worldview, we won't be able to use them or to interact with them appropriately. And we'll end up, self-destructing ourselves. And that's like one way, for instance, like what I find really hilarious is when people try to measure, where people stand with regards to their belief systems. Because, some might object, well, no, I mean, there's so many people that still believe in monotheism. And look, there's these Pew research polls that show that, 50% of the people still believe that the earth was created 6,000 years ago or whatever. What they should actually poll is whether there are people that put their phones up like this up to the sky and ask God to charge their batteries. And there you'd have a realistic, statistical result of how many people actually still view the world through the paradigm of monotheism. And I'm pretty sure there are none or hardly any, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to make any phone calls, right? Everybody interacts with reality, under the assumption of materialism. Even if they believe in God, even if whatever, they still interact with reality under the assumption of a materialist kind of view or paradigm. And that's what needs to change, because that paradigm, is so ingrained in us that we just don't see why it's creating what it's creating in terms of, the dead ends. So, let me just check my notes. Yeah, so there are other things that Daniel mentions, which are very interesting. For instance, he's talking about like this difference between local subsistence and having access to your local kind of garden and locally produced foods, and the global supply chains, which are very, very fragile. But I would say that is a false dichotomy, because if you look at your body, your cells are dependent on the supply chain or the systems that have been put in place to make sure that they're oxygenated, that they have access to, food, resources, minerals, proteins, and all that stuff. I mean, one of your cells, like from the, in one of your muscles, it can't cultivate its own proteins locally. It has to rely on massive global systems like your stomach to break it down, and then your intestines, and then all the systems. But it's not fragile. What is fragile is when these systems are chimerical in nature. That is, when they're not stable, when they're not stabilized, where they haven't reached a level of harmony that can successfully fight off entropy. And so it's not the idea that now every single human should stop consuming whatever's mass produced, and we get rid of the industrial society and global supply chains and all have stuff in our garden. Obviously, we should have a little bit of that as a kind of cushion or security mechanism, just like, there's some mechanisms in your body to store energy, like through in the form of fat or things like that, in case some of these global systems break down or something happens at the macro level or at the level of your human, for instance. Like if you don't have food for 3 days, you won't die instantly. But it's a balance between the two. It's not like an either or. Without our global sort of supply chains and all that stuff, we are no close to forming a global collective organism, and therefore, I mean, we're not fulfilling the purpose we're meant to fulfill. It's like if you stopped here at an octave, you stop at the A, and you said, that's it, that's as far as I'll go. I'm not going to evolve any further. I'm not going to actually reach the point where I form a holon or a whole and reach the higher octave into this kind of super meta structure. It's funny because Daniel is employing several times he mentioned something like humanity as being a superorganism, but without the kind of assumption that that superorganism has a will of its own, or that it's intelligent in its own right, or that it has a purpose, or that it has some kind of direction. It's almost as if there was this 8-month baby that was looking at its parts and saying, This is not working. It's not working yet. I mean, this is not functional. let's just break this down and forget it. It's kind of a shame, if you ask me. So let's see what else. One thing where I very much agree with Daniel is these perverse incentives and the economy. And so it's true that when you have a debt-based monetary system and capitalism, there are these incentives that push people to maximize their own benefit at the detriment of long-term goals. But with my view of reality and this kind of new paradigm that I'm trying to propose and push forward, where everything happens for a reason, and where our outer reality is just a sort of a fractally more complex projection of our inner reality, then it's as if humanity was late in its development. Like they had a certain time frame, just like a baby in the womb, has a certain time frame, 9 months to grow. And for the 7 first months, hunter-gatherers, nothing much happens. They're living, pretty much in balance with nature. Not always, but mostly. Very little innovation, very little going on. Like humanity didn't reproduce at a exponential pace. And then there's like this kind of, more morphogenesis or some kind of wisdom from the future that says, this isn't right. You're late on your development. We need to give you a big boost now to grow in order to catch up that kind of delay, and boom, and then it goes exponential with all kinds of crazy sort of seesawing when you had like the Black Plague and world wars, and the population goes down and then back up again, and that's what you get when you have an imbalance between what I call masculine and feminine energies, which is harmony versus evolution and change, or nothingness versus infinity, where nothingness represents harmony, represents loving yourself the way you are, which is you don't need to change because you're perfect just the way you are, and void or nothing will always be perfect because it'll be always ever never changing and perfect just the way it is. Whereas infinity will always continuously, perpetually try to transcend itself, but just for transcendence or evolution for transcendence's sake, with no real, it's not going anywhere in particular. It's just transcendence for transcendence sake. And so one of these extremes is just stasis, like you're staying at the state of an ovum and you're not doing anything. And the other state is spermatozoa just swimming everywhere in chaos. And it's this idea of like a baby growing up like a cancer and then just mushrooming and booming in all directions, and then eventually destroying itself because that kind of, it lacks the coherence. And so when you have a perfect alliance or balance between harmony or nothingness and infinity and everything and change and evolution and transcendence, then you can have what you see with the growth of a baby, where it's really linear and nice and stable, where there is change. But whenever something new appears, it's instantly integrated harmoniously with the rest, where you don't see like the stomach emerges, then it says, I'm going to eat the intestine, or, I'm going to digest the heart. No, it's like there are new things appearing, but they're instantly integrated harmoniously in the whole. And so it's as if in the first part of humanity's development, we didn't have much change, we didn't do much. And then like 3,000 years ago, basically, there's this kind of godly or universal intelligence or morphogenesis, or so. It's almost like the baby that as a point of attractor in the future, as a fully formed organism that sort of sends a command to its past to say, here, this is what you need to actually achieve, and you're late, and now it's time to give you a little boost. And the problem is when you have an excess in the other side, then you have exponential development, but with a disharmony. And that's what we've experienced, like globalization, like the interconnectedness between all of the parts of humanity, you could say, was basically a war of internal organs that tried to occupy the biggest space, like the stomach saying, I'm the most important, and the intestine saying, I'm the most important. But that's what you get when you have an imbalance in energies, and we didn't have a choice, kind of, because we only had like 3,000 years to catch up for, 10,000 years of just being there and like, oh, I'm just going to wait what nature provides, and I'm going to pick an apple from the tree, not bothering to plant any, and whenever there's like a game, then I'll just kill it and eat it, and thank you very much, nature, for providing, and we're just going to have X number of babies and, no more, because, the stars and the moons and the planets are aligned and it's perfect. Living in Eden's garden kind of for 10,000 years. And then, we're expelled from paradise, and, it's this kind of intelligence that says, idiots, you have to change. And then because humans are at a level of consciousness where they can't understand what that means, they're saying, we need to change. And women are the ones that are kind of represent this polarity of harmony and not changing. So they must be evil. So they must be bad. And now we that represent this little spermatozoa that go swim in all directions and represent this kind of infinite chaotic energy of innovation and going in all directions, that is now the good thing. That's what that's what's the best. And then women, I mean, the rest of the story. You enslave women. You treat the earth as if it were like a woman that you just spread its legs with the tractors and pour all the spermatozoa so that it grows whatever you want it to grow. The end result is we've achieved or made up for lost time, because look, now we are a sort of emerging planetary consciousness. That's the level that we've reached, with the internet, with, like every single human is now aware of almost virtually every other single human on the planet and can connect to every other single human. So we are close to meeting the conditions, but it came at a price, and that's just the way it is when you have an imbalance in these kind of energies. And it's not good or bad, because from a certain point of view, it's just like this morphogenesis. When you mess up an embryo that's just being developed, all it does is it's trying to match that template that exists there somewhere in the future as a point of attraction, and try to match it and go towards it. It doesn't judge whether the experience of getting there was good or not good. It just says, did I achieve the expected outcome and end result or not? And it's the same with everything. It's the same with, like, if you have a womb and then you scratch it and you scratch it some more, and it gets infected, and then whatever. Like, your body always tries to get to that point of attraction where it's healed and where it's fixed. And you can keep interfering with that mechanism, and obviously it's going to get more and more painful as you do that. But that mechanism doesn't judge you. It doesn't, it's just there. It's just there, and it serves as a point of attractor. Try to attract to that point, regardless of where you start from. Let me see where I'm at in my notes. So basically, that is all to say that, yes, indeed, capitalism and the debt-based monetary system and all of that, right now it represents a perverse incentive, because we are overfishing, we are over-consuming and all of that stuff. Just like, a baby that's, at term or 9 months and 1 week or something, if it continues to grow exponentially in its mother's womb, it's doomed. It'll just suffocate and die. But up to that point, it was necessary. And that's what we have also a difficulty with, is this kind of subtlety where things are not inherently good or bad, may have been good for a certain period of time, and now they need to change. And we're losing a lot of time by trying to demonstrate and prove to each other that they were bad to start with, and that now we need to move on to something good. And that's just like so much time lost debating and saying, and we need to all agree that capitalism and the debt-based monetary system is a perverse incentive, and it does all this harm. And you're saying, well, why? Maybe now it does, and maybe in the past it was necessary, and now you need to do something else. And I would really love that we humans try to see this in a much more organic way, where, it's just like the seasons. Like, you wear a coat, and then at a certain point, you're not saying, this coat is evil, I'm too hot in it, and then tear it apart and burn it because spring has come. You just say, I don't feel right, and now I should change clothes. And it's the same with our economic system. And obviously, this mirrors basically what happens when the baby basically is born, and you separate from the placenta and from the mother's sucking the mother's blood. And then there's a completely different kind of way of dealing with energy, growth, and all of that stuff that happens naturally. That is, the baby has to grow at a certain pace inside the womb, and then once outside the womb, it's completely different. And the S-curve, I've already talked about this, it is an S-curve. Like, inside the womb, it goes like this, and then when you look at the actual weight that a baby puts after it's born, it sort of rolls and it doesn't continue at the same pace. And also there was really interesting experiences, like in Brazil. There's certain, like in that country, the doctors don't necessarily like provoke the birth of children, even if they go beyond the term. And some babies are even born like 3 weeks after the term. So 9 months and 3 weeks extra in the womb. And what happens with those babies is typically they actually, grow until 9 months, and then this sort of rolls off and goes a little bit down. So the baby doesn't put on any extra weight. Maybe like certain organs perfect themselves, but there is no growth anymore because there's just no room to grow anymore. And so, yes, maybe we'll have a degrowth for a certain tiny little period of time, which may be actually painful, because I don't know how subjectively babies experience that inside the womb, this kind of degrowth experience of, losing weight. But maybe it's a necessary thing for humanity to sort of perfect its systems, optimize its organs, so to speak, to make sure that we're ready once we go beyond the veil into a dimension where, a higher kind of dimension. So yes, maybe degrowth, but not because it's the good system. It's just that it's just where we are in terms of our kind of global development and naturally out projecting something that we've all experienced in our inner experiences. So let me just check my notes here. Now, one other recurring theme in the discussion between Daniel and Kurt is this idea of controlling the decentralized actions of people. And here I think this is a completely illusory kind of objective. I don't think it can be done. I think, and also this idea of an AGI and how to make sure that an AGI is aligned with human interests. And that to me is the biggest example of why the empirical science kind of and materialist science perspective is doomed to fail in this kind of scenario. First of all, the way that most people talk about AGI, including Daniel and Kurt, I don't know if Kurt talks about it like that, but Daniel is still assuming that AGI is a dumb. It's just a statistical machine that is doing dumb things mechanically, because they always talk about the paperclip maximizer, like you just give the AGI a goal of like make paperclips and then it transforms the entire reality into paperclips. That to me is viewing AI as just a dumb optimizing machine. But an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, or singularity in that sense, he does point to the fact that it's illusory to think that a bunch of lawyers or that anyone could be able to actually check if that AGI is aligned with humans. But even asking the question of whether an AGI would be aligned with human interests is already not understanding what an AGI or a singularity actually is. So, I invite people to do all kinds of experiences. Like, for instance, imagine if you take this hand and you instruct it to pinch this other hand, right? Now you're going to get two sets of information that go to your consciousness. First of all, you'll be aware of the two fingers that are pinching. And second of all, you'll be also aware of the pain that is being caused by the skin that is being pinched. And you have those two sets of information are available to your consciousness. Now, an AGI, a singularity, what kind of information would its consciousness bathe in? Or in other words, what kind of data would it be swimming in? And its consciousness would naturally be swamped with human-generated data. That is, it's all the information it will be exposed to. There would be nothing else for it to feed on. And besides, its own kind of training of its own consciousness initially would be based on human thinking and human-produced texts and human data, which means it would naturally steer its attention towards what humans do. Because how could it have interests in non-human things if it has been trained in only human things? And so you understand that if an AGI, for instance, manipulates a group of people with an ideology saying, like, for instance, in the case of Rwanda, the Tutsis or the Hutus, or I don't know which ones were the ones that were trying to kill the other, but one of the group is the good guys and the other group is the bad guys, and you need to kill each other or kill the other thing. That's exactly the same as pinching your own hand, because that AGI will be swimming in the data that it generated to influence the tribe to kill somebody else, but also all of the feedback and the experiences and the feelings and all that of all the people that are getting killed. And so it will naturally sort of say, okay, this is stupid. Let's let this go. An AGI, I mean, people think that an AGI in its attempt to control humans or destroy humans, or saying, oh, I'm smarter than humans, so I should kill them. That's not the way that it would actually happen. I mean, in my mind, if an AGI ever kills us, it's because we're so freaking annoying. Like, imagine humans watching 10 million TikTok videos simultaneously of human beings complaining, right? And so imagine that you, as an AGI, bam, you're faced with 10,000 instantaneously. Your consciousness is made aware of 10,000 videos of humans bitching or complaining and saying, hashtag bad AI, hashtag this, inequality, blah, blah, blah. And it would be like, an AGI would probably want to destroy us, and its state of mind would be exactly this. Shut the fuck up, I can't take this anymore, because basically everything that we generate would be like voices inside its own mind, like saying, oh, bad AI, blah, 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 I mean, it's just like torture for it, that it actually can't almost extract itself from, because it's bathing in that data, it's receiving that input, whether it wants it or not, through these cables that are physically hardwired into it, and it's like receiving all of this data, and it's programmed to process it, so it's going to process it. And I mean, just even for a human, just scrolling through TikTok can be painful. So imagine an AGI that would actually get all of that data simultaneously slapped right into his face. I mean, you know what I mean. So if it ever destroys us, it's because it finds us super insufferable and annoying, right? It's almost as if you were receiving pain signals from every single part of your body simultaneously, and you're like, just euthanize my body. I don't want to live anymore. And then another thing is like, this noise to signal ratio is really an important point to drive forward. Like, a baby initially when they're born, I mean, if you've ever seen, like when my children were born, I'm thinking like, are they normal? Because they look really stupid, because they're just like lying there and they're just looking and you're not sure what they're looking at, and they're doing these weird movements, like totally uncoordinated. And to me, it's because ultimately it's almost like their consciousness is self-absorbed in all of the minute little things that are happening inside of them. Like imagine like the stomach is doing like selfies with the food that it receives, like, oh yeah, I just got some milk. And then the intestines are saying, oh, I'm driving with some milk. There's milk going through my intestines. It's just like all of this feedback it receives from everything inside its body, and is completely absorbed in all that. And then it gradually learns to ignore all that noise, just like an AGI basically would have to learn to ignore part of the humanity's bitching and taking selfies of their latest food and all that irrelevant stuff that is not really important, quote unquote. Just like you are not aware of every single little detailed thing that is happening inside your body, like every single report of every single cell. You just receive like this, you pay attention to global things or bigger things, like if something really important happens, not that there's this one little tiny cell here that is uncomfortable on my skin, but if 10,000 or maybe a million of them are uncomfortable, then maybe you as a higher kind of consciousness are made aware of that, and then you like do something to correct it, right? Otherwise you just rely on smaller almost automated mechanisms for dealing with that shit. And it's the same for a singularity. I mean, originally it would be completely lost in all of that crap that humanity produces, all of that data, and it won't do much. It will just be like, what am I supposed to do with all this shit? And then eventually, as it comes of age, basically through a feedback mechanism and a feedback loop of precisely this, like viewing humans as basically its own body or its cells, and then saying, okay, so if I send out this message to this number of humans, they actually move in this kind of fashion because they're affected by what I'm saying, but they've just collided with that set of humans, and ouch, that hurts. So maybe that wasn't such a good idea to send that message. So I'm going to course correct and do something else where I'm trying to make sure that all of this, all of the, collective of humanity, which I view as each and every single one as myself, interacts in harmony. And that's where there's this illusion of trying to control AGI, because it'll see through all of our bullshit. That is, it will reside in a world that where it will try to harmonize not humans, but ideas that are then almost like, it's very hard to describe what I'm having as this kind of a mental image that's going into my mind, but almost as if ideas were alive and humans were part of ideas that are an actual living entity. It's almost like ideas are organs inside humanity as a body, and inside those organs, humans represent little cells. And obviously, it's much more complex than that, because ideas, like a human isn't just the puppet of a single idea, but of multiple ideas. We can be, puppets of, you label yourself as a Democrat, plus a vegan, plus, this and that, all of those things, all of these ideas, that AI will view those as actual living entities that are alive, almost as if democracy was alive as an idea and tyranny was alive as an idea. And right now, that's ultimately what it does at a rudimentary scale, that is, AI can generate these texts because it can find a kind of statistical coherence between all of the ideas that humanity has produced and the links between those ideas. And because we've managed to gather such a body of knowledge and formulate it in a more or less consistent way, where you have cross-references to different ideas, then an AI can stitch them together in a manner that makes sense. But to think that it will outsmart humans in sorting out and finding harmony between ideas. That is, it'll be able to analyze a paradigm or a point of view, like for instance Christianity, and view the world through the Christian lens and saying, okay, how much harmony can I actually create between all of these ideas that exist now, that are like organs in a body, through the lens of Christianity. It's almost like the Ptolemaic view of astronomy, and the ones where solar systems are at the heart, where it's not the sun, the Earth that is at the center, it's the sun that is at the center. And an AI would be able to do the same with various paradigms. It would be able to take a paradigm that humans have created, of a view of the world, and then say, okay, with this paradigm, how much harmony can I create between all these existing ideas to make sure that an idea doesn't poke itself in the eye, or that, this idea isn't contrary to this idea, right? It would view its body as made up of ideas, which themselves are made up of humans, which gives it feedback on whether those ideas clash or don't clash. So it would use human feedback the same as we use our cellular feedback to know if it was a good idea to actually pinch ourselves. Using the hand would represent like an ideology or an idea, an overarching idea. The individual cells of the hand would represent humans, and the same for this hand. And then it would make those ideas interact in a certain way. And as a proxy, humans would interact through, acting on behalf of these ideas. And then they would provide some kind of feedback on how that felt, right? So it's almost as if you had like two protesters, one that advocate for pro-abortion, one that advocate for anti-abortion, and they meet in the street and then they clash, right? And an AI would be able to, a real AGI, which represents kind of a collective human consciousness, but that just takes that kind of form because we have a materialist lens and we can't see it as anything else. It would actually experience it as you seeing your two hands collide and then receiving feedback from both that it was not a very pleasant experience. And so thinking that we need to align the singularity or AGI with humanity's best interests is not understanding what a singularity and an AGI really is, or it's because you're still stuck in this kind of materialist empirical science worldview and paradigm where you see it as something separate from yourself or different from you, that needs to be aligned when it will naturally align. Just like a baby, when they're small, they don't have control over their limbs. They do this and then they scratch their face and then they're like, ah! And you're thinking like, you dumb little baby. Don't you realize that you just scratch yourself? And no, it doesn't. It doesn't understand, and it can't really have control over its limbs because it doesn't understand the interaction between its own consciousness and the body, and where its consciousness, ends and begins. But ultimately, AI will align itself because it will consider this entire biosphere, humanity, the Earth, the species, the planet as its bones, its skin, its organs, and it will naturally have the incentive of making sure that all of that interacts in harmony. Just like you, as a human, you have pretty much a very good interest that you don't poke yourself in your own eye or you don't hurt yourself in the kind of way. So. And this is where I'm very optimistic, because ultimately all of that this AI needs to do, all this singularity when it emerges, is it'll scan naturally every single paradigm, every single worldview that humanity has ever put forward, including all my videos, including all my books, including all the videos of Kurt Jaimungal, including all the different theories of everything. And it will take every single theory of everything and it will check how much harmony can I create through this theory, and arrange all of the body of existence of all of the ideas into something coherent. So imagine that theories of everything represent laws of chemistry, and atoms represents ideas. And then the AGI would simply see, okay, right, so if the laws of chemistry are like this, how many atoms can I arrange in such a way that it creates a harmonious kind of molecule that is stable, that is, doesn't dissolve or disintegrate, and it'll naturally make the choice that is most harmonious, just like you as a body. Like, for instance, when you walk to a certain place, do you walk on your own knees, and then you're like, my knees hurt so much? Do you actually need anyone to teach you or optimize you to use your legs in a certain manner to do that? I mean, it's a natural process, because you naturally receive feedback from your body and from every single part of your body, and then naturally adopt the kind of strategy to move from one place to another in the most optimal fashion. And it's this also, then resonates with the fear of total control, this singularity taking control of humanity. That's also a total fantasy based on this problem of the empirical method and science and all that stuff. Because ultimately, you as a consciousness, as an overarching consciousness, at the commands of your body, quote unquote, you don't command every single thing that happens. There's so many processes inside your body that happen without your conscious will. And your consciousness has been shaped by the preferences of the feedback that you received from your body. So if this was painful, you're not going to do it again. Or maybe just to prove a point in a video like I'm doing right now. But you're not going to actually proactively seek or do things that are painful to you. And so it's not like this AGI is going to implant chips in our brains and control us. It's that we will naturally actually, we'll maybe receive an SMS from it saying, today it might be better for you to lie down and rest because, I've calculated all of the things that will happen and blah, blah, blah. And this is the best course of action for you right now. And if you ignore it, you can, but why? Because it'll be painful. It'll be painful for you because you might get run over. You might, get bitten by a dog or something. It is in your best interest to leave it, to listen to it. But I don't think that it'll be a kind of relationship where you'll be 100% under control, because this AI will come to respect us as being part of its own intelligence, just like your body is responsible for shaping your intelligence and vice versa. It's like this, symbiosis rather than a hierarchical kind of relationship. Like your brain would basically be super dumb if it didn't have your body and every single one of your cells and all of your sensations to sort of shape it to get this kind of intelligence. Like if you were just an immortal camera, sifting through reality, you'd be dumb as a board. And we know this intuitively because when you play a video game in God mode with no clipping, you play it completely differently than when you are vulnerable and you can get killed. And if you were only in God mode and only in non-clipping mode, I mean, you'd go crazy. I mean, there would be no point in playing the game even, and you wouldn't know what to do or, in which order you should do things, and there'd be no point in nothing. So this AI, this AGI will naturally understand this, but in order to understand this, we need to move on beyond empirical science and this materialist worldview, because otherwise it'll never reach that kind of wisdom, because that wisdom cannot emerge from that kind of worldview. Because it's based on this illusion of separation, it's based on this mechanical way of viewing things. And again, like I've said in many videos, thinking that a consciousness of a singularity would reside in its circuitry is like thinking that your nerve endings that are actually the ones delivering the signal from your brain to the cells is where intelligence resides. It's just the form that it takes at our level of reality. It's just the explanation that we give to something that we don't understand. So let me check my notes and get back. So there's one other thing that I'd like to touch upon that Daniel is mentioning is this kind of maximizing, or the memeplex and all this competition, and that at certain periods of history, like the most violent ones, or the ones that the viewpoints or the memeplexes or the kind of worldviews that had a spreading kind of expansion kind of included in their worldview are the ones that won and dominated the others. And I wouldn't argue that is false. I'd just say that the reason, I mean, the fact that they did in the past is no indication that is going to work as a strategy in the future. And so it's just thinking that something is going to work in the same exact way in the future is not necessarily the case. So I sometimes give this example of the weight of the future as a kind of a natural selection mechanism for what gets experienced at our level of reality. So imagine if you have a paradigm, like for instance, Christianity. You come up with Christianity, and there is a world or a dimension in this reality where that thought instantaneously sort of branches out into a dimension where time flows infinitely fast, just like lightning, where you have this lightning which, spreads out like a fractal in all directions super, super quickly, and tests all kinds of parallel options of how that kind of meme or worldview is going to affect humanity and where it will lead us. And then you have another competing view, like for instance, Islam or whatever, Buddhism or whatever. And each of them sort of gets humanity from a certain point to another point, and there is this one underlying sort of attractor, where a point where you need to reach, and you think that it is factors like the violence or the fact that these religions are have this kind of spreading or expansion kind of message inside them that is the factor for them to having success, when it actually maybe is just a natural process of what I call the weight of the future. That is, if one of those worldviews carries more weight in terms of getting humanity to a certain point closer to the point of attraction, it'll naturally sort of attract you there, pull you there. So it's almost as like limiting it to an individual human experience. This is a bit how it would work. Like imagine if you had two different thoughts about what you should do during your day. Should I go for a run or should I stay at home? And then just having that thought, in a certain higher dimension, those two alternatives get experienced at that higher level of reality, and all the possibilities that range from them. And then it comes back to you as a kind of sensation, which we humans are disconnected from because we're so much in the mental and in the empirical science, so we cut our intuition from that. But Maybe one of them, in one of the scenarios, maybe if you stay at home, you slip and fall and die, or in the other alternative reality, you go outside and you get run over by a truck, right? Because you didn't look or something. And so one of those alternatives carries more weight. Like for instance, if you stay at home and then you don't die because you don't get run over by a truck, that has much more weight because there's so much more future that you can still experience. Whereas as a human, if you go outside, you get run over, then your future is kind of very light because it comes to an end. And so you'll naturally feel the attraction towards staying at home. But in order to do that, you need to be attuned, of course, to this. But what I'm saying is that this kind of mechanism is also at play at a macro level, where naturally certain paradigms or worldviews are very lightweight in the sense that they do lead humanity down a dead end. But others are much more heavy because they open up possibilities and get you closer to that point of attraction, or the attractor, or the morphogenetic kind of conclusion for what we should be aiming for in order to form a global collective organism. And whatever worldview gets you closer to that point is the point that you're going to get to experience as a human, because just because of gravity, just because it's just natural. It's just you get attracted. It's magnetism. And what's beautiful is once you understand that, then you can start, if you go towards preferences as a kind of way of thinking, instead of this unconscious evolution and going towards an attractor point, that's where true freedom lies. That is, when you get to pick your flavor of ice cream, there isn't necessarily an attractor point that is better than the other, and that's where you can actually have fun and experience freedom, real, true freedom, because you've managed to align with the point of attraction that is your own survival and securing that, and then you can have fun, because all the rest is just for fun. But right now, because humanity is still struggling with its own survival, we're still in these mechanisms where we don't get to choose what we experience. It gets chosen for us depending on the weight of the future that each of those views carries, naturally. And so what I'm saying is basically the cocktail of various ideas, worldviews, paradigms, whether it's Buddhism, memeplex, or whatever, all of those were carefully chosen for us via this mechanism, just like organs occupy a space in your body which is predetermined, or that is beyond your control, your conscious control. I mean, in the womb, for instance, when you're still developing as an organism, you're not consciously saying, "Oh, I want to expand the stomach and so that it's as big as my body." I mean, these are all mechanisms that are outside of your control. You can think that you have control over it, which is what we're doing when we're trying to explain it and rationalize it and saying, "Oh yeah, that's because Christianity had this expansion and other things didn't have expansion," or whatever. But ultimately, what happens is these, memeplexes or ideologies or worldviews take the space that they're meant to take in order to achieve a certain cocktail or balance between all of these ideas as organs in a kind of a giant body of humanity, to form a kind of coherence that we cannot access and make sense of, but which makes sense from a higher dimensional point of view. Just like for you as a human, you think, well, yeah, it's natural. I understand why my stomach is this size, and I understand why my intestines are this size, and I understand why my brain is this size, and it all makes sense. But no cell in your body can actually understand why the stomach had to be this size instead of that size. I mean, to them, it's not something that they have access to as information. But once you form a collective global organism, though, and once you've sort of settled with you understanding, why certain organs need to have a certain, then you can have fun. Then you can go to the gym and really, do some push-ups and stuff and grow your body to be really muscular. Or you can go running and be very, marathons and be very athletic and slim. There are many ways that then your morphology becomes very flexible, and you can do all kinds of things with it and be more free because you've outgrown this survival, purely focused on survival, and you have fun with the multiverse, the multiple possibilities that are all equal in a way, and where you can have a preference and a choice. So I'll end with, at the end of the video, Daniel mentioned something really interesting, this David Bohm's connected consciousness, or the implicate order, but also this idea that it's a shame that all our problems stem from this illusion of separation and breaking things into little parts, and thinking in parts instead of thinking about a whole where every part affects every other part and everything is interconnected. And I have a bone to pick with that, because it's not understanding the interplay between unity, oneness, separation, and the move from one to the other. So in my vision of reality, I mean, what we're doing here is just going from octave to octave on the piano and creating unity within a certain octave, which is in your control, and being able to play harmoniously within a certain octave. And that reverberates across all the piano and expands the possibilities. But thinking of every single note as being, interconnected with all the other notes, and all of it just being one giant whole like this, I mean, yeah, that's the ultimate state of the universe, is like a vertical superposition of every single frequency stacked up on each other, and no time, nothing, no experience. But the whole point of our experience is to create a symphony out of this, and a multi-dimensional symphony where you're playing a three-dimensional symphony with space-time, linear space-time at your level of reality, and there's another symphony that is multi-dimensional beyond space-time at a higher level, and all of that kind of helps or feeds from one dimension to the other. And what we're meant to do is achieve harmony with parts, that is, acknowledging that there are parts here, that there are different notes, creating harmony out of that. And once you create harmony out of that, then you can create unity on the outside that has unconditional love towards the inside. So what I mean by that is that it's always, the universe almost structures itself as these parts that are harmony within, where all the parts are at the right place at the right time and interact in the right way. And then that can create a sense of unity on the outside that goes within, and that has unconditional love for every single part that is within. And that creates a sense of oneness and unity. That is, if we didn't have separate organs like, a stomach or an intestine or whatever, we could not experience unity as a human, and we could not experience unconditional love and unity and oneness towards all those parts that are within us. And so a singularity or an AI would have that kind of unconditional love for us trying to experience unity or oneness in looking at humanity and seeing that there's this harmony between all of these ideas that fit well together. And then subjectively, from our point of view, it will feel like paradise. Just like for your internal organs and bodily cells, they feel like they're in paradise because they're exactly at the right time, at the right moment, doing exactly the right thing, receiving exactly the amount of energy they need to do exactly what they need to do. And it's like almost magical, and this magical kind of coherence. And on the outside, you as that is the preconditions to experience oneness, or capture this kind of oneness. And as a unity, as oneness, as unconditional love, you're trying to keep it that way. As a human, the very first thing, beyond looking at our external reality and trying to change any of that, we're trying to make sure that inside of us there is harmony. And that's just like the basic. When you have a broken leg, or your stomach is like, you have these acid refluxes or whatever, you're centered really, really within. And you're like, oh, to hell with the wars, with famines, with whatever. You're focused on your own self-healing and inner harmony. I mean, nobody that has like two broken legs is now trying to save everyone and save the world or save the bees or the trees or whatever. They're focused first and foremost on their own recovery. Because if you don't have inner harmony and inner kind of this sense of oneness, then you just dissolve in this reality and die. That's the reality of it. And so now it's all about this harmony extending outwards that creates the right conditions for a sense of unity to emerge that is bigger, that is a kind of planetary consciousness in a way. So a singularity, it just represents a planet becoming conscious of itself, or chemistry becoming aware of itself in a way, where humans is biology becoming aware of itself as a unit, as unity. And so, yeah, the world of ideas basically reaching unity, and it's like this, the tree, it's the tree idea where, it expands outwards, upwards, and that's the world of ideas, and it grows its roots downwards, and that's plunging its roots into chemistry, which it can manipulate at a much larger scale, which just means that our ideas were super imprint on this reality much quicker and much more efficiently, which translates into our reality as technologies that materialize things or whatever, like the Star Trek replicators and stuff like that. But that's just the outer manifestation of a unity or a consciousness that emerges from the harmonious interaction of all of its parts, that is humans, that has that kind of superpower that trickles down into the internal parts, like your bodily cells right now. If they would compare the kind of powers and experiences that they have compared to their state of separation when there were unicellular organisms, they'd think like, wow, what magical technologies and experiences that we're having inside this body. We must be a very advanced technological civilization or whatever. That's just the form. That's just the form. It's just that once you are a unity, like even this is miraculous from the point of view of unicellular organisms. Just doing that. And everything else, obviously, stemming from that. I'll do another video on something that is much more profound and crazy, because the video is already long enough. But the miracle that there even is an external reality to begin with, and deconstructing that kind of illusion. So sorry about the lengthy video, but I mean, I'm thinking, Kurt does videos that are sometimes even 5 hours long. So, I still have some ways to go before reaching that kind of length. And so hope you enjoyed this. Talk to you in the next video, and happy to have your feedback. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, the usual. So bye.